Hello, everybody. Welcome back to You Can't Win. Another guest episode for you. This is Tom with Donald as usual. And joining us today is our good friend Mike.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam, Mike. This is a friend of mine that I've known for quite a while online. And he's kind of my go-to guy for a lot of different things. And one of those things is climate change and environmental issues and all that kind of stuff. So, Mike, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us kind of, why do I always go to you? Why do you always know about all this stuff?
So I'm not an expert, and that's probably the most important thing that people should keep in mind. Basically, I'm just a guy. I'm scientifically literate. I'm a molecular biologist, and I became, I guess, really concerned by what I was seeing in the climate literature. Sort of after 2008 is where I really started paying attention to it. So I just kind of became familiar with what was going on in that field, a little bit more than the average Joe. So yeah, I think that's the main reason, right? Like over the years, when we've been kind of discussing climate, if you've had a concern or an idea or something like that, I think I've often been able to point you to a resource maybe or cite something that would be helpful. But yeah.
Yeah, I think you're also able to like break things down. You can look at these sort of more jargony, like hard studies and stuff that are sort of impenetrable to someone like me, and I can just sort of ask you like, what's the real deal here? Because what I have available to me that makes sense to me is probably filtered through so many layers of propaganda and just kind of incompetent, journalists and stuff. So to have someone who can go to the sources, make sense of them, and then relate them to like in everyday language to me, that's always been useful. So I wanted to sort of like share that with our audience as well.
Yeah, I think there's an additional problem with the climate stuff, insofar as there's kind of almost like an official double discourse, right? Like you have the whole field of climate communications is trying to figure out how do we convey findings in a way that's like not going to panic people, right? That's not going to freak people out. That's going to give people a sort of like a constructive mindset, and that's it's increasingly difficult, right? Like if you're being realistic about the state of affairs, it's difficult to do that. And I think it's not unfair to say that as a research community, the climate research community has not done a very good job of, particularly kind of at the policy track level, talking to decision makers in government, has not done a very good job of being, kind of brutally honest about where we are and what the scale of change that's necessary is.
So I've heard a lot recently of this kind of like, I mean, I don't know much about the literature. I did have taken like say courses in environmental economics and kind of things, which I mean that was still at maybe 15 years ago when it was still kind of like talking a lot about joint development mechanism, Kyoto Protocol, that kind of stuff. Very very limited kind of things compared to what the scale might be necessary now. But now I've kind of heard more and more like this kind of 12-year mark they talk about, like we have 12 years to reverse before things kind of fall off and become kind of, I don't know what the word is, like self-replicating or whatever, like self-sustaining cascading effects or something. And then
Yeah.
And so is there a tipping point kind of coming in that kind of sense, or is it
Okay, so there's a couple of things there, right? I mean, we're often dealing with, because people want single numbers to kind of describe both the current state and what we need to avoid, right? So you'll hear people talk about particular temperatures as like this is like the safe boundary for climate change. It's very difficult to assess what that means to the average person, right? Like what is unsafe climate change? Is it catastrophic civilizational breakdown where we can't do global trade because, like storms are so frequent that, logistical networks collapse and like we lose whole swaths of technology?
Yeah.
Or is it, like morbidity and mortality increase by a couple of percent? It's hard to say, right? So it depends what you're talking about, but um, there is a temperature, right, beyond which it's going to be very, very difficult to maintain, certainly the status quo, right? Like if you're interested in maintaining post-industrial capitalism, and that's often what people mean, right, when they're talking about dangerous climate change. It's like, as a middle class first worlder, I will lose my accustomed standard of living, right? Like something will happen such that I have to, go work in a field or something like that. Right? And that was the kind of I would almost sort of like parochial view that many people have. And but there's nothing wrong with, because all of these kind of like standards or numbers or cutoffs are just arbitrary, right? So if you want to pick something, well, okay, what will cause, like serious difficulties for organized global civilization? Kevin Anderson, I think, was saying anything past like 4 degrees is not really going to be viable. Past 2 is dangerous, right? Is definitely dangerous. And some of the more recent estimates are down even lower than that. Just in terms of like, okay, global trade, agriculture at the scale that we need to feed everyone, maintaining electrical infrastructure such that we can benefit from our kind of historical accumulation of technology and all of these things. Somewhere between 2 to 4 degrees is probably like a reasonable estimate for that kind of tipping point. In terms of like positive feedbacks, I think it's reasonable to say that nobody really knows, right? You're not going to get a number out of anyone in terms of temperature or a single number that will say, okay, beyond this point, definitely the ice caps will collapse. There'll be massive flooding. There's going to be, impossible self-reinforcing feedback. They could be there, and there's lots of debate. I was looking recently at some of the. So one of the positive feedbacks that people are worried about is like methane bubbles coming out of the seabed in the sort of northern hemisphere, right? So you have a lot of like Russian scientists taking boats out and taking seabed cores and looking at actually like bubbles of methane that are venting up through the ocean. And methane is, of course, this is a very potent greenhouse gas, so this is like a serious concern, right? Because if all the permafrost up there is thawing, and we get this big methane burp that really shoves the climate in or the increases the forcing, they would say that it forces the climate system by retaining more energy in it. Then you could have this sort of positive feedback that makes things worse and worse. But it's I'm not going to put a number on that, and I don't. Probably someone might offer like a high number, like if we get past 6 or 8 degrees, like probably the ice sheets are done for, kind of thing. But
And so, what would you say about kind of like technological responses? I guess a lot of people now are just talking about mitigation,
yeah,
or just even you do see maybe more and more kind of like the climate march and kind of protests around this, and kind of people talking about policy changes, but a lot of these seem to be still in this kind of technocratic kind of technology driven kind of mode of trying to figure out these kind of big changes in adaptation instead of just kind of emissions reduction. So
yeah, so I guess there's kind of two tracks, right? Like you have the adaptation sort of technologies or policies, as well as the negative emission stuff, right? Maybe there's more than two tracks. I mean, you could divide this up into like people who want to use technology to just adapt to what's coming, people who want to remove carbon dioxide and maybe other gases from the atmosphere, people who want to do geoengineering, right? Like emit sulfur dioxide or something like that into the stratosphere and reflect solar energy, right?
Yeah.
So there you have a bunch of these kinds of technological or engineering fixes. Well, adaptation is not a fix. Adaptation is just kind of like giving up, or accepting, I guess. Not necessarily giving up, but accepting that severe consequences are on the way, and we have to kind of bunker down and figure out what to do about them. But yeah, there's a lot of that stuff. I'd say for the most part, I'm a little bit skeptical of it, and I'm waiting for good studies. I think that make solid quantitative arguments that because ultimately doing all of this stuff has costs, right? Like, and the most obvious one from the climate perspective is like, okay, so if you take these negative emissions technologies, right? People want to withdraw carbon dioxide from the atmosphere using big scrubbers, right? And you see these like engineering drawing mock-ups now in the news all the time, right? And they look like these big fans, these giant metal fans, and they'll have a little engineering guy in a hard hat standing next to it to show how big it is and how impressive it is. And one of those facilities withdraws like a minuscule amount of carbon dioxide, and then you have to. So you take the carbon dioxide and you compress it and make it cold, and so it becomes a liquid, and then you store it in like a former fracking well. This is the kind of thing that they want to do, right?
Yeah.
So this is not easy, right? I mean, this is energetically costly. Doing the build out of the infrastructure means emitting a whole bunch of carbon dioxide when you refine the metal and make the concrete and do all of this stuff that you need to do to actually build the facilities. And then you have to operate the facility. You have to actually do the physical material transformation to make the carbon dioxide storable in the well. And then you have to ensure that the well doesn't leak for millennia, right?
Yeah.
And it's a major undertaking. It's a major undertaking.
Sure. So what are you like? Do you have kind of ideas that you kind of think about in terms of um, policies or technologies that would work, or is it some of those things where it's just obvious to you that things would have to change in certain ways, or is there also kind of like more kind of stretch goal kind of stuff that what I mean? Like, is there certain technologies or things that you kind of think are or policies that aren't being prioritized that would be great ideas, kind of thing? If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think my perspective on this is just, and this is kind of getting into speculation. I mean, this has nothing to do with the science of it. I mean, but if you want to think about it from this kind of like gamey view, right, where you're playing Civilization, you have a technology tree or something.
Now we're talking my language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have a technology tree, and you have like a polluting technology, and it's down there somewhere. It's at the base of that technology tree, and what you want to do is swap out that technology, which is burning fossil fuels, right, for another kind of technology. When you put it that way, even from the Civilization kind of like gamey point of view, usually you can't do that, right? You can't just reach into the back of your tech tree and then swap out one of like the foundational choices you made for your Civilization, right? So at least if you can do it in the game, it's usually made pretty hard. And so it actually probably would be really hard, and it would take a long time. And I think if you're talking about like rationally planning kind of a technological suite that would be sustainable or viable in some kind of post-carbon world, that was the appropriate technology movement in the 1970s. And the oil crisis in the US and globally at that time was the opportunity to do this, right? Like if our culture, if our civilization was going to be able to do that, we needed that kind of run up. And people knew, right? People knew that fossil fuels are a problem. Potentially climate change is going to end up being a problem. Like they knew at that time, right? I mean, there's propaganda against this kind of thing, but Arrhenius was the guy who was in the 1870s, I think, publishing about the greenhouse effect and this kind of thing.
Wow,
So
really?
yeah. I mean, this is like knowable stuff, right? Like if we were truly scientific, rational civilization, then these are addressable problems, maybe, right? In theory, but the question is how long does it take to do that kind of thing? And what kind of time frame do we have right now? And this is where, getting back to what Don was talking about with these numbers, right? People want to say, well, we have 10 years. And there are different ways to kind of to phrase this, but I think Kevin Anderson, who I like a lot. I mean, Kevin Anderson is one of the few kind of, I think, people who is able to speak truth to power routinely on this from a position of like real authority. He's a Tyndall Institute, I think, scholar in the UK and well respected. And he's, I wouldn't say he's a pessimist, but what he insists is that speculative technologies not be included in our modeling of climate change, right? So the normal kind of projection that you'll get about, what do we need to do, right, in order to become a sustainable society, assumes that negative emissions technology, carbon capture, storage, all that stuff works, and it works at scale, and that indeed you can get a net negative emissions out of this, even after you do the huge build out and scale up of infrastructure.
Mhm.
So, that's basically his point of view. And so what he says is, right now what we need to be doing in order to have a reasonable chance, I think it's like 50% chance of staying under 2 degrees, right, which would be a really good idea, is in the West by 2035 to have decarbonized. So like OECD decarbonized by 2035 and the rest of the world by 2050. Okay, so there's some equity consideration here, right? Because ideally the countries that have emitted an enormous amount to get industrialized and so on should have to decarbonize first, right? Because we're most able to do so. So that's the kind of plan, and what that would mean is that emissions have to be falling in OECD countries 10% per annum, year on year, every single year, 10%.
Yeah.
And I'm Don, I'm sure that's not happening.
Sure.
So we're not on that track. Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing. I mean, I only know it more from the policy side, and it's funny. I mean, it's fun. It's sadly funny, I guess, maybe in some ways. How in the United States now, I mean, even if there's 10% target or something like that reductions each year, you have in the United States just an openly hostile presidential administration to any sort of even just kind of limited kind of change. And then in Canada, it's kind of funny because we have this kind of progressive kind of communication strategy, at least from the government, trying to saying that they're the ones that are going to fix it, and they have this climate action plan and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, I saw this week that Ontario is planning, like the Conservative government in Ontario is planning on putting stickers on all the gas pumps in the province saying the carbon tax is going to cost you, it's going to, it's this very limited carbon tax compared to the scale of the problems involved.
Yeah.
But it shows, kind of the tax going up over time, and it's very directly kind of, it's like the official government position of Ontario is that this is all a waste of time, basically, and they've canceled a lot of the programs around renewable energy, even though it costs billions of dollars to cancel them, and it's almost like there's this I mean, for many years they kind of had this maybe not plausible, but they could kind of sell themselves as denialists, kind of in a very kind of overall maybe more pleasant way. But now it's becoming more and more aggressive and more kind of in your face of just straight denial. And I'm not sure what you think about where that's coming from, or if that can be kind of overcome in the kind of next 10 years or so.
Um, to be honest, I'm like politically. I guess I would just say I'm on the climate front. I'm not expecting very much.
Okay.
And this is kind of one of the things that I mean, we often see in climate modeling, like if you go look at the IPCC reports, they'll have a scenario that will be colloquially called the BAU, the business as usual scenario, right? So where nothing changes and capitalism continues on its way, and there's a couple percent growth year on year, until 2100. And then the Earth by that point will have warmed 8 degrees, and like somehow, markets are still functioning, even though the Earth has become this, Venus-like hellscape, right? Like it doesn't make any sense, right? So, my perspective on this is that probably not a lot is going to get done in the near term, and in part because of this denial stuff. I mean, that's part of the problem. I think the denial stuff, as well as the idea that the denial is really the problem, are both kind of deflections from the difficulty and the scale of the real problem. Because I don't think that, it depends what the terms of the debate are, right? Like, can we do things in the next 10 years that are going to help? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that includes political organization and the formation of nonprofit institutes, and I don't know, like workers call, there's all kinds of things that you can do to improve your life, to make your community more robust and sustainable, and so on. In terms of, like, are we going to see much from the powers that be? I don't think so, right? I don't think so. And I mean, at the provincial level, I mean, they're denying it openly, but at least they're honest about it, right? Like, with the feds, we have a party that plays along, right? Mouths the, okay, yeah, no, 2 degrees is a problem, right? We have to hit 1.5, and then they're paying whatever $3 or $4 billion to Kinder Morgan for a pipeline that doesn't work. That's how in the pocket of the industry they are, right? So I think in terms of communication, like, it would be nice to see maybe political parties getting a little bit more serious about this, but it's very difficult to be serious about it without just being shouted down as an alarmist, or like you're trying to destroy the economy, right? You're trying to prevent like factories from coming back to North America, whatever, right? Like there's a lot of ways to push back on that. So I don't know.
What do you think some of the things that that a community could do to make themselves more robust? Like, does it make sense to kind of go like prepper style, making like your own independent energy sources and sources of food and stuff like that, or what makes sense to you at this point?
Um, this is so specific to probably like a geographical area or a community, and you're going to find a
Sure.
million different answers to this, right? Like the preppers are going to tell you, yeah, right? Buy guns, buy my like special canned food that lasts extra long, whatever it is.
Yeah, get your Alpha Brain supplements, all that stuff.
There you go, right? You need all that stuff, stacked deep in your garage, or when the raiders come, you're going to have problems. I honestly, like, being serious about it. I think everyone needs to kind of think about what is a likely outcome given a business as usual. So I think what I left off in what I was saying earlier was this idea of business as usual for till 2100, like it's not going to happen, right? Either we're going to change something, or things are going to get so bad climactically that we're just going to be forced to change, right?
Yeah.
And I think what everyone needs to do who's really concerned about this, is to try to think hard about your community and your situation and what the likely consequences are. And that's a tall order. It really is. So, um, what I think, maybe to give some practical examples. Um, like if we look at, for instance, the climate literature on agriculture, there are lots of places in the American South and, like the Great Plains, that look like they will be very dry, right? Very, very dry. And so, if you're someone who lives out there and you're involved in agriculture, I mean, that's something obviously that you need to consider, right? And you need to get organized around either, I don't know, like converting to dryland crops, or maybe it's moving somewhere else. I don't know, but it depends where you are so heavily that, it's hard to give kind of like general advice. And it depends
Sure.
what your skills are, right? I mean, I think this is a big problem that we see in a lot of the sort of climate communities, or communities that have a climate focus. Um, you see like transition towns, for instance, right? And so a transition town, the idea is, okay, we're going to go local and sustainable, right? Like we've decided, collectively, as a group of kind of like usually a few thousand people, to kind of make our town an intentional community, that is responding to climate change. And to be honest, I mean, I'm not sure how practical that is, right? I think if you can disentangle yourselves from, um, in a conscious and deliberate and organized way, from the global economy, then wow, right? Like, tell me how you're doing it, because
Yeah.
it seems like a very, very difficult project, and I don't think anyone's really got a model, right? There's no model or formula that you can kind of pick up on and replicate. And I think what I would say is just that, if you look at life kind of in the early industrial revolution, when things were like globalized but less globalized, and people tended to stay where they were. The places that, like have access to waterways, for instance, right? You're going to be a lot less worried about, like, can I get food if you're on the Great Lakes, or you're on the Mississippi somewhere, like, the Mississippi's going to be trafficking goods till the end of time, right? So, or till, whatever you're worried about happen till you're dead, right? So don't worry about it, right?
Right.
So, I think, that's sort of, I think, basically the problem, is that this is a very difficult thing to offer a general model for, and I think people have tried. I mean, Don, I mean, maybe when you can talk about your ecological economics experiences and what people kind of talk about in that context.
So I actually, my only experience with that is that I took a few courses in environmental economics,
Sure.
and it was pretty at the time. I mean, I had a good teacher, and it was like a useful thing, but it
Hmm.
was still, this was maybe 2003, 2004, 2005. It was still really this kind of idea of the mechanisms, that everything that was in place was very, very simple, very, very market driven.
Right.
Everything was kind of uh, um, these kind of clean development kind of ideas, and sort of, so a lot of it was kind of like, okay, it was kind of like the normie kind of center left kind of, or centrist kind of approach to climate with everything. So basically, the idea was, um, put a tax on pollution because that's the most efficient way of shaking out the who actually needs to pollute, and then use the money to mitigate that through bonuses to people that, for things like climate debt and things like that around the world, and just stuff like that. And it was actually kind of funny because it really did kind of feed into that whole kind of I think current, especially in Canadian kind of op-eds, but it does happen in the US too, where it looked like a technical problem that had a pretty easy solution, and it was kind of like the smarty man consensus or something, like, right, like that was what you did, and then that would kind of solve everything. And then even the Green Party in Canada, that's always been their kind of position, put a tax on pollution proportional to the damages, and then kind of use the money to convince people it's a good idea and help them through the transition and stuff. And the thing that's kind of concerning to me, at least, is that year by year it seems like that's less plausible, even as just kind of a basic kind of policy idea. And it's funny that it's now become almost finally accepted by some sections of the Canadian kind of centrist kind of elite that would be kind of a very minimal kind of tax on pollution. You have it around Canada, most places in Canada. I mean, all places now basically have this kind of minimal kind of pricing, at least on carbon. And they've actually even started using, I heard an ad yesterday to promote it that kind of says, they say even carbon pollution instead of just saying carbon dioxide emissions in a very kind of technical way. They do say,
Yeah.
this is affecting people in a certain kind of way. But it is kind of funny in that way that it's almost as if it's being adopted as this kind of plan at a time when, I mean, I'm not even sure what the price on carbon could be that would make it sustainable at this point. Like, it seems like it would be so high that it would almost be command and control no matter what. You know what I mean? Like, it would, so.
I mean, okay, so just to give people context, and the 10% number that we were talking about before, in terms of historically, things that we have records for, I think the only comparable instance is the collapse of the Soviet Union, and they were getting, like, during the collapse of the Soviet Union, so not a good time. It was something like 5 or 6% year-on-year declines in emissions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are wrenching changes. The idea of inducing, because I mean, just from a sort of like a neoclassical perspective, whatever, even from that perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Because it's like, okay, demand for your commodity is inelastic, right? So what kind of tax do you need in order to drive down use 10% year on year to the point where nobody's using that commodity by 2035?
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like taxing is the appropriate tool.
Probably not. I mean, I don't really care about this kind of stuff one way or the other. I mean, if we pay some carbon tax and it actually, like, is used in provincial coffers for something useful, then good. But yeah, is it going to make a big difference? I don't know. Probably
And
not.
yeah. And I'm not even sure. I think it's scaling to something like $40 per ton or something like that. I don't even think it's um I think that's like I'm not sure what it is at right now, but I think it's which is kind of funny to me too, in the way that that's what Stefan Dion promised when he ran, and I think, was that 2008 or 2011? Anyways, so
I don't know.
anyway, it was 10 years ago or something like that. That was their proposal anyway. It's kind of thing. It's like um, it's very very seems like quite kind of I don't know. Like, it's funny because it's like the science and the circumstances seem to have changed, or at least like have become much more convincing that it's more important than it was 20 years ago or something like that, to me at least. So yeah, not sure.
From the political side of things, I mean, the longer that we delay, the more intractable it is, given the current constellation of interests, right?
Yeah.
Because now it's like, okay, well, you have 10 years to, or whatever, number you want to pick, but if you want to get this done, kind of by 2035, let's say, so you have 16 years, that's still pretty daunting, right? Like,
Yeah.
really you need to smash the power of the fossil fuel industry. And that this is like political trench fighting for, it would have to be that entire time to make it happen. I mean, Like, think about how difficult that was, how that would be, how entrenched these corporations are, how long their history is, how good they are at fighting these kinds of battles. You
Hmm.
know, who is going to be doing this, right? Is it like Bill McKibben and 350.org, right? Like they were named 350.org because that was like, we have to stop at 350 ppm carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and I think now it's like 412 or so. It's high, right? Like it's
Yeah.
much higher than that number. So you know, the kind of the climate um, activist side of things has been ineffective, and I don't think they're going to get effective on the time frame that we're talking about here, right? So yeah.
So I kind of get I always think about this stuff in terms of like metaphorically as like you've had a big party at your parents' house and they just called you and they're coming home and the place is trashed and there's like drunk kids sleeping on the couch and all this kind of stuff. So like how close are they to getting home and how much cleanup do we still need to do? You know what I mean? That's sort of how I think about this.
Yeah, you know, sometimes like there actually is kind of an interesting metaphor in here, or maybe like a useful simple metaphor, in terms of like the carbon budget, right? Because when we're talking about, you know, and there's different. It's hard to offer one number because there's different ways of calculating this, but you know, if the total amount of carbon dioxide emitted from, you know, pre-industrial period to now exceeds some number, right? Some gigatons of carbon dioxide. Let's say it's like 1,800 tons. Um, then from our model, you know, on the basis of our model, we predict that there'll be, you know, dangerous climate change, like two degrees centigrade increase over pre-industrial. Okay, so you know, with that number, how far along are we? Right? We have
Hmm.
this number, and if we go beyond it, like we're screwed, right? That we don't get to emit very much more than that, right? Or that will be a self-limiting process, put it that way. You know, so we have this set budget, and basically, you know, I think I want to say 2015 number was like we have like 20% of that budget left. And you know, our emissions are higher than they've ever been, right? Like it looked like they were kind of leveling off a little bit after 2008, and I mean that was mostly the function of the financial crisis. But you know, we have 20% left, and we're like spending faster than we've ever spent before. Like the money is just flying out. You know, the emissions are just flying out of our wallets, and it's like, you know, if you're spending at this rate right to the edge of your budget, are you really going to stop, right? Or are you going to go into debt? You know, you're going to be borrowing from someone, right? You know, and I think like that kind of way of putting it can be useful, right? Like, because we're not likely to go to stop, right? We're gonna blow that budget, and the question is
Yeah.
by how much, right? You know, yeah, like how much are you gonna withdraw from your children's future? Because that's really ultimately what we're talking about, right?
So to use my metaphor, it's like we didn't even turn the music off and they're pulling into the driveway.
Yeah, right. Like you're gonna offer a beer to your dad, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the plan.
And just see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
That seems to be the strategy right now, right? Like let's just negotiate this. That's the adaptation side of things, really. Is like, okay, I'm gonna give my dad a beer and see if he's down, right? Like anything could happen, you know. We don't know that he's gonna be mad, right? So let's just chill.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I mean, for the average person, like we're talking about, you know, you mentioned like moving to dry crops and like agricultural issues like that. So, what kind of like, you know, I don't work in agriculture. I get
Sure.
food from a store, you know, like everybody else. So, like, what does that mean for me? Does that mean that the grocery stores are just going to have like, you know, 6 boxes of cereal every week, or like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, it's hard to say, you know, and I guess I don't want to talk about individual action in the sense of like, you know, either moralizing or giving people the impression that like this is going to be super effective at, whatever outcome you're thinking about. Like I don't really know, right? Like I'm just as embedded in industrial society as everyone else is. Um, but there are things that you can do, I think. I mean, like, Don said something interesting in one of the earlier podcasts, talking about, people who make kind of climate change the reason that everyone has to listen to them and get on their political bandwagon, right? You have to do it right now. Like it's really bad. We all got to get in on this right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that kind of attitude or mentality is very, very dangerous, and it's very, very easy to get sucked into. And I don't, I think this is where like a lot of like the doomer stuff and like the prepper stuff kind of comes from, as well as this feeling of this.
Yeah,
But
like that's clearly not a good path to go down, right? Like you're sort of, I mean, we talk about this all the time on here about like making a little quest for yourself because you don't want to actually confront the real quest that is your life, you know?
yeah,
And so that prepper stuff, I kind of see it that way. Like you're not gonna live in a bunker off canned food, like that's not gonna happen.
no, and the slightly more sophisticated ones say no, but I'll have like four buddies and we'll raid the neighbors, or yeah. I mean it's silly stuff, right? I mean you don't run a society on that basis. So
Um, sorry, just to interrupt. It's funny that
yeah,
you said that because I actually just submitted an article for Harper's, which is probably out now by now if it goes through. But and it's about climate change, and it was the joke. Like I mean, the concept behind it was like a financial advice column,
sure,
and uh, and it kind of works through this kind of what should you be doing to plan for a climate resilient retirement kind of thing, right? And then, anyways, the joke is it does then go into um, sort of the stuff about teaming up with raiders and trying to live in peace with the warlords, but don't actually join them because you'll become their slave and all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of hearing you say this stuff. It's like, well, maybe it's not so much of a satire. If I don't know what to.
no, really, I mean it's because the problem is there's this liberal kind of messianism around progress, right?
Yeah,
And oftentimes, like, just for like totally normal, everyday people, their response to like a serious challenge to that viewpoint, where it's like, okay, the direction of history is towards human perfection, right? And like humans are going from the caves to the stars, and like the future is Star Trek, and we just have to kind of like, get the technology and the politics right, and everything will work out, right? That kind of person, I mean, can really be disturbed by a serious, like, and because they're often kind of like fetishize science and this kind of thing, to have a scientist come and say, like, this is really unlikely to happen. I mean, what happens, I think, is they invert this kind of messianism, and it just becomes apocalypticism, right? And it's like, you know
Right.
no Star Trek means Fallout, right? So
Yeah, like if progress isn't gonna happen anymore, or at the rate that or in the way that we have come to expect it to happen, then that means all is lost. But that's probably not the case, right? Like it may be that we aren't going to have like new technologies at the same rate that we've been having them, and all that kind of stuff. Life won't be changing and quote improving the same way that it has been, but it will go on in some form or fashion, just not in a way that we can maybe imagine right now.
So I mean that's why I brought up. Sorry, I digressed a little bit there, but that's why I brought up what Don was saying, because what Don concluded with was, well, I don't know, right? Like maybe I don't have to get on your bandwagon. Maybe things are just going to be really bad no matter what happens, right? Like maybe things will just be really bad for a while, right? For an indefinite amount of time, you don't know. And
Hmm.
for me, I mean, it's kind of like, a lot of people have an outcome in mind, and they have a scenario, and they're projecting something, out onto this potential difficulty, right? And it's like, well, what constitutes the difficulty is going to vary from place to place and person to person and all these kinds of things, right? So yeah, I mean, it's important not to get carried away with it, and I think maybe it might even be useful here to get a little bit theological and say that, if you have some perspective on sort of like a meta-historical view, right? You have an eschatology, or you have an idea about how the present circumstances fit into an overall progression that is not going to collapse when it turns out that Star Trek can't happen, or it's really really unlikely, and you need to prepare for something else. If you have that kind of view, this becomes much easier, right? From a Muslim perspective, right? There's lots of, it's a weak hadith, but the hadith about the planting a tree, like if you're holding a tree in your hand and the end of time comes, the last day is upon you, plant the tree.
Right.
Right? Like that's the perspective. You're being rewarded for your intentions, not for the outcomes of, your actions, right? So, we have a ways to go. We don't know when the end is going to be. We don't even know that, the things that are happening now represent like the end, capital letters for the human story. We don't know that. And although some of the shuyukh will kind of indicate that it seems like it's more probable than not, maybe the end is coming. You were gonna die anyway, man. Like you have to still just stay within that frame. You have a life, and you have to do the best that you can within that life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you were yeah, like you said, you're gonna die anyways. You were born into, like, you weren't put here to live forever, and so if your idea was that I'm gonna be here and things are just gonna get better and better and better, and then maybe we'll come up with immortality something, and I'll keep staying around and stuff, like that's just not it's not an appropriate way to kind of confront your reality. I kind of think about stuff like the very very earliest humans who like started civilization or whatever you want to call it. um, they were not in a good situation, and they ended up turning things into what we have today, which is, I think it's hard to say that it's anything worse than what they had. So I mean, they started with nothing.
Worse than Atlantis?
Worse than what we have. Oh, worse than Atlantis.
Yeah, no, I mean, people have been in tough spots before, right? For sure. And I think having the prophetic story, or from from a Christian perspective, maybe even more so, having that story of Jesus as a point of reference for, like, the people that God loved, they suffer, right? They suffer a lot. And so I think that kind of thing is necessary when you're thinking about this, not to go too crazy, right? And not to leave your job and this kind, because I mean, this is the sort of thing that happens with, like, what's that crazy guy who always talks about how, like, the Dajjal is Russia.
Oh, Imran Hussein.
Yeah, well, I don't know, whatever his name is, but like, people are seriously affected by that stuff, right? Like, they really believe, like, the end of times is upon us. And it's like, look, the traditional perspective is you keep working, right? You keep working. And so I guess, maybe to bring this back to the overall question, like, what can people do if they have some kind of perspective on, like, this being maybe at least like an echo of the end of times, right? There a lot of the signs are there, you could say, right? But many of the signs are, in the Islamic tradition, we say they're minor signs, right? So they're repetitive. Right. They occur throughout kind of the historical story. So we know like things are getting tough, right? Like, and things will continue to get tough. But I think at least from a Muslim perspective, we have a response, and it's the science of the end of times, right? And it's the science of transitions and of changes. Um, and a lot of that is about how you live ethically in a society that is what it is, right? You can look around. It's very difficult for Muslims, for non-Muslims, for anyone to make a living, to put food on their plate without participating in the very system that is destroying the conditions that allows them to do that,
Yeah,
right?
like things weren't great, and now everything is going down the tubes. Like it was already pretty bad for a lot of people.
Sure.
So what I think that's a good perspective. Like if you want to talk about like what can you do, well, you need to figure out what can I do day to day to be the best sort of person I can be anyways. Like that's sort of the thing you should have been doing beforehand, regardless of all this climate change stuff anyways. So
Yeah, and I want to say, like, I'm talking as someone, like, I'm not trying to tough talk when I say this, right? Like when I was a kid, I was horrified by the idea of impermanence, like to the point where I remember, like, so actually I had a chemistry teacher in like grade 10 or something like that, who was teaching us thermodynamics, or I don't remember what grade it was, but I was horribly depressed when he was talking about like the heat death of the universe. Like one day he came in and he was just talking about thermodynamics, and he was talking about entropy, and he was like, and all of this means that time will just run for a really long time, and then everything will be spread out really, really finely at like very low temperature, basically, right? And like nothing matters ultimately, because that's what I got out of it anyways. I think it
Yeah.
was like
mhm.
reading Sartre in French class at the time. It's very, very not a good combination. But I could not get out of bed for a week after my
Wow.
chemistry teacher told us that. Like that horrified me, right? So it took me a long, long time to get over this kind of like attachment to, I don't even want to say dunya, but like I didn't want anything to change, right? Like I remember being horrified by the idea that like of vinyl records, right? Because every time you play a vinyl record, the needle wears out the groove a little bit more, right? And I was like, this is sick. This is evil, right? Like you've recorded this beautiful thing that you love, that you want to hear a lot, and every time you listen to it, it's a little bit more destroyed. Like that was so disgusting to me, like so mental. But so I relate when people are like, "Oh my God, everything is really going to change," right? I do. It's difficult. But yeah, I mean, I think the way to look at it is, look, like big wrenching change is a couple decades off, probably. Inshallah. I mean,
But
and
in our life, I mean, that's our life. Hopefully.
yeah, I mean, it's in our lifetime, but it's not. I mean, look, and I'm talking from a North American perspective here, right? Like, there's a Gibson quote I'm kind of fond of about like the future not being evenly distributed. you know, uh, like things are happening in Syria, right? Like the future is here, right? Like the really bad things. It's hard to imagine climate change making things much worse for some people, right? But for kind of like non-war torn European, North American types of societies, my guess is that probably things are going to become more difficult relatively gradually for the next maybe 15 to 25 years. I don't know. I mean, and this is purely my opinion, right? But you can do a lot in 15 to 25 years. The Prophet's mission was not, was on that scale, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
23.
right. So things can change big time for you personally, for your society, right? Transformation is not out of the question, if that's what you're interested in, but it means hard work, right? And so yeah, I think in terms of what individuals can do, I mean that's a question that I've kind of been personally trying to tackle for a long time. And I went way overboard. Like, I think when I first started talking to you guys, I was definitely more on the like the doomer prepper end, kind of like
Yeah.
I got to get some land, baby.
That's what I remember. Yeah, you wanted to like get some land out in kind of the
Get a
northern
farm.
parts of Canada where it would kind of get hot, and then that would be like not just tundra; it would actually be like ideal conditions and stuff.
There's problems with
Not to
soil
throw any
depth.
good
Yeah.
tips out there for other people, but
So yeah, I mean, and this is part of where my perspective comes from, right? Is like, because this was something that I became interested in before I was Muslim, right? So there's a heavy like non-Muslim substrate to my emotional reaction to this, right? And my kind of relationship to this topic. And my initial kind of response when I started really learning on my own, kind of like reading the papers and figuring out what the models meant and this kind of thing, was like serious like panic, depression, like these kinds of things. It's hard. But I think when you get to Islam obviously allowed me to do this, alhamdulillah. When you get to a place where you're kind of like, yeah, these are the conditions, and yeah, I'm at war, but that's life, right? Like, this was always going to be a struggle. you know Things get a little bit easier because you start kind of getting more realistic about what works, right? And for me, I mean, maybe it would help a little bit, just to give my kind of approach to this right now, because I think it's very different. But I'm a molecular biologist by training, by trade. And my kind of initial response after some years of learning about climate and thermal economics and these kinds of things was like, yeah, this as a field is probably not that useful, and certainly the way that it's practiced right now is enormously wasteful. And I became I had real difficulty like doing experiments where it was like, I don't the data that are produced by this experiment probably are not really going to change anything for anyone, right? And it's like, you're looking at the number of pipette tips you burn through, and all of the reagents that you're dumping down the drain and all this kind of stuff, and you're going like, well, there's a lot of social infrastructure which is emitting a lot of carbon to allow me to do this, right? And so I became very skeptical that molecular biology had much to offer. And I think that's totally wrong now. I mean, I think particularly microbiology has a lot to offer in terms of and just kind of being on the scientific engineering side of things. Like, a lot of my concern is technological rather than social or spiritual. But I think from the technological side of things, like a lot of the supply chain problems that we're likely to run into with small molecule drugs and medicines and these kinds of things can be ameliorated locally with like not too much capital investment. So like I'm talking about like in Ontario, for instance, Don, Apotex?
I can't. I'm not sure what you mean. Sorry.
Sorry, Apotex is a generic drug manufacturer that it
Okay.
actually, yeah. So I think Apotex is like probably we have Apotex, we have Sanofi Pasteur, we have a couple of other manufacturing facilities in Canada, but not too many, right? And so we often run into like drug shortages these days. I don't know if you guys have read over the last few years in the papers about this. There's often difficulties getting drugs in hospitals, like particular medications and these kinds of things. And I think so my perspective is no longer how do I survive and how do I keep my family safe and how do I do these kinds of things. It's really kind of like, look, like things are going to go on in some form or another. I mean, if you want to get theological about it, there's scriptural justification for fleeing society, right? Like there's a hadith where the prophet says, at the end of time, um, if it becomes like difficult for man, actually, I should not be relating hadith. Sorry, the content of the hadith is basically at the end of time it will be so difficult for a man to maintain his religion that he has to flee to a mountain with a goat, right? And it's this kind of like scriptural justification for doomerism or prepperism or whatever you want to call it. But almost all of the shuyukh that I've heard talking about that will say that that's not what's happening now, right? Like we have to participate in societies. Societies are urban, and we have to take seriously like how are people going to live in an ethical way. And I think a lot of that relates to how our economy is structured, how our food system is structured. Those are parts of the problem. There are ethical problems, there are social problems, there are spiritual problems. But I think for individuals, you need to look at where you are, who you are, what your skills are, what you're already integrated in, right? Because God put you in a place for a reason, right? And if you don't believe that, fine, but it's still true. You're there for a reason, and there's an interesting saying. Who was it? Oh man, Ibn Ta'ala in his wisdoms, his hikam, he
Mhm.
says like if God puts you in the world, like don't try to withdraw yourself from it, and if God withdraws you from the world, then don't try to put yourself in the world, right? So if
Yeah.
you're working in some field and things are going well, right, and you're making a positive contribution, then just do that. Just do that with a positive intention, and with this knowledge of the context that you're in, right? And try to make a change for the better. And if you're withdrawn from the world, then you have more flexibility. Go be a hermit, go be a prepper. I don't know, but yeah, that's kind of my perspective at this point, I would say.
Yeah. All right. I mean, I think that's a good place to wrap up for now.
Sure.
But that's a good takeaway, I think. Let's get into the questions. So let's see if we have anything that might be relevant to environment or apocalypse type stuff. Let's see here. Um, Not really. You guys, listeners, if you do want to hear some answers about that, you can go ahead and send those into the Curious Cat, and we can have Mike on another time, and he can maybe respond to some questions that people might have,
Sure.
or even just like things they want to hear us talk about.
Yeah.
Um, since we got into some theological stuff, maybe I'll bring up some of these. So someone said, I don't know how to reconcile the idea of a just God with eternal damnation. How do these concepts fit together?
Some people deserve it.
Yeah, like I think we talked about this like on an earlier episode that who to think about when you think about people going to hell, and it's not people that just did one wrong thing here or they happen to be in a different religion or something like that. It's more like the leaders of just enormous evil. That's the kind of people I sort of think about as like who's going to hell. It's those people, and there's going to be maybe more, or I don't even who knows. But I sort of think about it like it's people who deserve it. You don't know exactly how to judge that, but you don't. That's not your concern.
I think I don't I want to be hesitant about trying making giving fatwa on the podcast, but I think Imam Ghazali's opinion was that eventually the fire is extinguished, right?
Yeah, I think he may have had a view like that. I've definitely heard somebody having that view, but that's I'm
It's
those kinds of
eternal in
things are.
some sense, but it's not like. And anyway, for the vast majority of like sinners, right? You're eventually done, right? And even I think he said that for people who are in some kinds of states, right? Like it's actually beneficial for them to be in hell because at last they're remembering God, if only through this kind of like pain and torment.
Yeah, I think Omar Farouk Abdullah said something along the lines of like the people that are going to hell, they're every day they kind of say like this is who I am. This is who I am. Like the afterlife is you coming to understand exactly who you are, and that's based. I mean, God created you. You made, that's not something that was entirely. You were created, but then you made all those decisions in your life, and those were all, you're morally culpable for those decisions, even if we look at it from like a God's eye perspective. Well, He created you, and those decisions are, a byproduct of that initial act. you, that's not how it was from your perspective. From your perspective, you made the decision, and so if you're doing evil, 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 that's what you are. So that's kind of how I think about that. What do you think, Donald? Let's get
Yeah.
a Christian perspective on this.
So it's actually kind of it's funny because I've always been turned off by that kind of stuff. Like I find it very like difficult to kind of wrap my head around, like the idea of like eternal torment or something like that.
Yeah,
It
it's
just
not
seems
very
like so,
pleasant, right?
no, but it just but it's funny because and it's also very like common in the Catholic tradition. Like you just I mean obviously like a um you know uh especially I guess maybe in popular culture the idea maybe even more than in the actual religion, like the idea that there's a very clear determination that a lot of people would be going to hell and all that kind of stuff, right? Like it just seems like that, and a lot of judgment, obviously too, like of just average kind of people that probably shouldn't be judging.
Yeah.
And I think that it's funny though because there have been kind of like theologians. I think it was Hans Urs von Balthasar, like who said things like, shouldn't we pray that hell is empty? Like
Hmm.
shouldn't we be hoping? And normally that's if you kind of said that in a more direct way. I mean, that's a very pretty direct way to say it. But if you said it in a more direct way, like of saying everyone does get saved in the end or something like that, that's actually considered heresy, or like at least it's not considered right because it's considered universalism, which is just basically like because then your actual um, actions have no consequence, then you would think like in at the end, or like anything would have no consequence because everyone would be saved then, right?
Right.
So the concern is always but that was kind of a clever way of putting it, was kind of like almost like as a question of saying, shouldn't we be hoping that people don't go there, and kind of focused on that. And so that kind of pivots it to kind of aiming more at, which has always been my kind of perspective, I guess, in the last few years and stuff, is I'm very, very concerned about not, like not admonishing people just because it feels good to do that or something, like I know that that's kind of like tradition sometimes, that I just don't feel like I am as interested in that kind of thing. And it's hard because, especially with the, a lot of the religious, social kind of conservatism and stuff like that is very kind of separate from what the trends are in society, at least. And it's hard to kind of wrap your mind around both, of like not admonishing but then not supporting kind of thing in different ways. Like you don't know. It's hard to find the line sometimes where you see a lot of people that obviously very get a lot of joy out of sort of gloating over it, and I don't know if that's it's hard to
That's
know where. Yeah.
foolishness.
I'm sorry.
I think that's foolish. I mean, if you're gloating and saying, so and so's
Yeah.
going to hell, man, hell's for you, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
careful, fear God, right? I think that's a perspective a lot of people don't have, because they're always thinking about other people in hell. Like
Yeah.
hell is for you personally, right? Like when God is
Yeah.
telling you about hell, like that's a message for you personally. Like and Omar, the companion of the prophet, he said, if I was to be told that there was only one person in heaven, I would believe it's me. And if I was to be told there's only one person in hell, I would fear that it was me. Right? So
Yeah.
this is the point, right? Is to generate hope and fear, not to condemn other people or whatever.
Right. It's up to
Um,
God in the end, anyways. It's not it's not like you can determine beforehand, like, well, I got this many good boy points, that many naughty points, so in the end,
sure.
it's
Yeah, I
about
have.
the state, your internal state. Like if you are deranged horrible person, it doesn't really matter how many prayers or how close to whatever tradition you were. Like, God's not going to judge you entirely based on that. He's more looking at your internal state, you know?
Yeah.
And there's a question I would have for Mike, but we won't probably be able to get into it now, just because it'd be probably too long for to be able to answer. But almost even like a scientific approach to even the question of eternity or something, because that's actually something that the recent popes and stuff have kind of gone into, sort of almost very kind of esoteric, kind of like almost strange kind of debates about the idea of eternity and the idea of being beyond time and all this kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
very kind of, it's hard to kind of wrap your mind around, because it does kind of bring up all this kind of strange ideas of like everything has already happened, everything will happen. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of it's kind of, but it is important to kind of I think conceptualize as kind of a or at least it might be useful sometimes to kind of think through that kind of thing, I guess. Yeah.
Probably like the most brief thing that I would say about it is, there's this isn't really a scientific perspective, but there's a Hadith Qudsi where, so this is like, the words of God. God says, don't curse time, or I think the word is dahr, is duration, because I am duration, right? Like I'm the
Yeah.
one doing this thing, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, eternity is I guess we're talking about an actual infinite of duration or of moments of time. I mean, that's those are a number of really complicated issues there, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to think about.
Sure.
Okay, let's keep moving here. Um, okay, Donald, how about this one? What do you suggest as a starting point for someone interested in Catholicism, aside from reading the Bible?
I mean, it's almost like a running joke on Catholic Twitter and stuff to not read the Bible. Like it's, I mean, like don't do it first, because it's
It's
just
like
like
Marx with communism.
it's a little bit, I mean, if you're reading it just kind of straight, a lot of it just doesn't make sense, because a lot of it's just kind of like it's like like the begats and all that kind of stuff, and like all the different kind of like very kind of specific kind of stories and kind of things that it's more kind of things that need to be explained. And so if you had like a study Bible or something like that, but I think the thing that's been the most interesting and kind of like enlightening to me is different discussions of like the saints' lives, and just people that just they're humans and just seem like, sometimes they just seem like average people or something like that, but like they've kind of elevated themselves to this kind of true belief that they've kind of I find that kind of stuff fascinating. Like they have like a book called The Sayings of the Desert Fathers,
Hmm.
and I found that kind of thing, like just little short kind of blurbs about like a lot of them read like riddles or like koans, and uh, it really kind of gets you into that mindset of morality, I think, and kind of like mindset of very very being careful of falling into traps about one way or the other about different kind of things, like, because
Mhm.
that's the thing that it takes a while to kind of sink in, I think. But you'll be reading there might be a chapter about like say eating or something like that, like some gluttony or something, and then um a monk will be like, there'll be like a few monks or something like that, and one of them will say something like, um, I heard that monks never eat or something like that, right? And then the monk will start eating a lot or something, just to prove that that's not what defines you, kind of thing, or something like that kind of thing. Like it'll be
Sure.
kind of like these kind of back and forth, or then it'll be like, we're all eating here, come join us, and then instead of doing your prayer or something like that, and then they will then not eat for the rest of the week or something like that kind of thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just, it's any time that there's any sort of temptation, they very clearly kind of like put down a marker kind of thing, and like we're not gonna give in to this kind of thing, and because we only have one kind of thing. And after a while, you kind of also realize that a lot of the stories are obviously not like um, uh, it's more important kind of what you take away from them. It's not really, because I think that's one of the things about reading the Bible, is kind of like you can't um it's not going to make sense if you're just reading like, and then the sun went away and then came back or something like that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like it won't kind of sink in. I think maybe at least it didn't for me, and I've heard that a lot. That and
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, I think that a lot of people have similar experiences with the Quran as well, and I mean, I can relate to what you're saying about reading about people who have kind of internalized the real point of religion to, and all this kind of stuff, and not to
yeah,
get caught up in a lot of these outward things that, what should I be doing in terms of my eating and all that kind of stuff. Like that's good if it guides you towards the actual point of things, which is to
yeah.
cultivate a certain um, to turn yourself into a certain kind of person.
And another kind of thing that I would say too about some of the different lives of the saints and like medieval kind of stuff, and um, uh, um, is that they're way more exciting usually than you might imagine. Sometimes, like I don't know, I find at least um, like the Little Flowers of Saint Francis is one book, and to me it honestly reads a lot like something like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas or something like that, because they
What are
just
those little flowers, huh?
yeah. Because Saint Francis he goes around just doing crazy things, basically, like really like just off the wall kind of stuff, like just decides that he's not going to wear shoes, or those kind of things, like it just kind of weird, kind of little strange things. And he has like companions with him that kind of come along with him, and he kind of talks to them that way too, like he kind of in that kind of like wild kind of off the wall stuff, and usually with a lesson underneath it, obviously. So then that's the other thing I would say too, is that you don't have to kind of plan to sit down and kind of wade through, like, I don't know, like, I mean, I think the three of us do find that kind of interesting, the kind of like judicial kind of side of it, like the kind of um you know decrees or whatever, that kind of stuff,
Yeah,
like that
the
kind of, I think.
doctrine it
Yeah,
drives.
I think we like the architecture of that, but I think a lot of people
Existence.
can just deal without that, for me at the start,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that shouldn't be your entry point for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is actually among Muslims kind of a genre of literature that's underappreciated, if not abandoned, right? Like if you read the older, like you read the Kamiya or something, there's a lot of stories of like just stories of righteous people, right? Like they're not prophets in these kinds of things, right? They're saints or teachers, scholars, and a lot of them have like an element of humor or like a very practical element, and they really stick with people. So yeah, that stuff is great.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the alchemy of happiness.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry. The
Yeah,
Alchemy of Happiness. Yeah.
just for not everyone is up to date on their
Yeah.
Arabic.
Right.
Um, okay, Mike, I have a question that you may be able to help us answer here. So this is directed to me, but I think it applies to you as well. It says, Tom, I'm not sure of your race. I'm pure Aryan, by the way, but as a white guy being Muslim, but is a white guy being Muslim weird or seen as weird? Um, I
No.
think I've encountered, at least in my personal experience, I think other white people have found it to be a lot weirder than Muslims have. Muslims
Yeah.
do not. I've never had anyone bat an eye about it, but other white people have definitely. I mean, I think the first couple years it was constant joking, constant kind of disparaging comments all the time. And honestly, it didn't really bug me because it just sort of proved it almost proved the point for me. Like, yeah, I made the right decision here. Look at these people, these fucking animals.
Yeah. I had much the same experience. I mean, if you want it to be weird, it can get real weird. But it's not in general. I mean, probably the weirdest thing is just that people are like maybe a little bit too happy that you're
Yes.
white.
Yeah, the golden boy thing, kind of like, oh,
Yeah.
we got one, we converted one of the white ones.
I think people maybe occasionally will misjudge your attitude or orientation towards Islam. That's probably the worst thing that happens. Like I
Yeah.
occasionally have people try to like they're like apologizing to me about like fiqh, and they're like saying that I think like the tradition needs to be reformed, and I'm like I don't think it does. Like so they'll think that I would be receptive to some kind of like, oh, I'm glad to see you, brother, don't worry about the hand chopping, like,
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I
that's a real big pull for me personally.
yeah. I mean, I think the thing is that like for some people it probably is a real problem, right? Like they do have a problem with like understanding what historical Shari norms were about. But yeah, that's it's not weird.
Yeah, I think, we probably didn't change as radically as some people do. Like you see some of these like types that go full. I don't want to disparage Salafis, but I think you get the picture if I say like they go full Salafi
They're thobed
and
out.
what's that?
They're thobed out.
Yeah, thobed out. Yeah, exactly. When it becomes almost like a LARP, like they're just kind of playing a character or something, that is weird to everybody, I think, except the other fellow thobed out characters. Um,
I mean, lots of those guys are really nice, and like
yes, yes,
I
that's
usually
true.
make an effort to kind of at least smile at other converts, so it's not like I don't know, because you occasionally get the guy who wants to be the only white guy,
Hmm.
and then he's frowning at all the other converts. But
Yeah, kind of judging them.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I try not to be that guy,
for sure.
and I try to talk to those guys, and actually, like interpersonally, Salafis are great people, like really.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's the stereotype of like the angry, uh, like I've called them chimps, and that I don't want to say that that's even a majority of Salafis. Salafis are just very. They have a certain way that they interpret things, and it's fairly conservative, and it has some very distinguishing outward things that you can always kind of tell what they're about. You know, that doesn't make them bad people. I've met some of the nicest people are Salafis. I mean, one of my favorite speakers is Mufti Menk, and he's a Salafi through and through. But
Sure.
you wouldn't think of him that way. You kind of think of like ISIS and all this crazy stuff. That's not really what the majority of Salafis are about. That's just sort of because they look a certain way and because the like jihadi psychotypes also look very similar to that because they're trying to be all hardcore and stuff. Things get a little crossed and mixed up, I think. Have you ever gotten the like marriage proposal stuff where they see a white guy and then they're like, "Oh, my daughter, my friend has a daughter," all that kind of stuff?
No, that's never happened to me, and I'm glad it hasn't. But I think most I don't know how common that is, but I would say most of the Muslims that I interact with, like the men typically will ask pretty quickly if I have a family, and then so they're aware
Yeah.
that I'm married and everything.
I mean,
So
I think that's normal. Like they would ask that if anyone knew that they're just meeting. Like
yeah, yeah, of course. No,
Muslims like to get the people hooked up.
no, I just mean how normal the marriage proposal thing is. Like I don't think I've ever seen that happen actually.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't experienced it myself. I think in Jordan there was some strange comments that I got here and there, but that's in an Arab country. It's a little bit different than.
I just like
Uh,
honestly, like, I mean, if I had a daughter bringing home a convert guy and saying I'm interested in this guy for marriage, I would be a little bit more leery, probably. I would investigate him pretty carefully, I guess, because there is a little bit more. I mean, like I think convert weirdness is imported by the converts typically.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
but
Yeah.
yeah,
What are your motivations and intentions in converting?
it wouldn't even be that. Just like like are because the thing is that like lots of people say that they're Muslim, right? And particularly with converts, there will be a lot of people who will they will profess Islam and they give shahada, right? And it's like, okay, like legally you're a Muslim, right? But what that means to them is something quite different. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, people kind of, because you're doing your own reading and you kind of decided to make a big life change based on that. Sometimes it can be a little off.
sure.
All right. Okay, I think that's a good place to wrap up the episode for now. It's been great talking to you, Mike. I think we will have you on to discuss a variety of topics.
I love to. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening. As usual, you can see us on Twitter at YouCan'tWinPod and send us questions. We love answering these questions. And yeah, next time.